humiliated for 8 years for not being able to have children until she discovered the truth that destroyed her ex and her mother-in-law forever. Stay with us until the end to avoid missing the report that will shock everyone shortly and turn this family's fate upside down overnight. The dining room table was impeccably set with a white linen tablecloth and silver cutlery lined up precisely. The aroma of roast lamb spread through the luxurious home of the Montero family, where Mercedes, the matriarch, had organized a family dinner. But in that house, gatherings were not meant to unite, but to destroy. Renata sat at the corner of the table with her hands clasped in her lap, trying to control the trembling that was taking hold of her fingers. 8 years of marriage to Emiliano had made her an expert at hiding her pain, but that night, she felt like everything was falling apart. Mercedes, in her blue silk dress and pearl necklace that sparkled under the candlelight, looked at her with a twisted smile, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Let's toast," said Mercedes, raising her glass elegantly, her sharp gaze fixed on Renata. "To the family, to the continuity of our legacy." The other guests raised their glasses except Renata, who felt the lump in her throat become unbearable. She knew where this conversation was going. She knew she was about to be destroyed once and for all. "It's a blessing to see this family grow over time," Mercedes continued with false sweetness. "But of course there are dry branches on every tree, branches that simply don't bloom." A poisonous laugh ran around the table. Renata felt the heat rising up her neck. "Mom, please," Emiliano murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. Mercedes ignored him and fixed her gaze on Renata. 8 years, Renata. 8 years, and nothing. Not a single child. Not a single one. Renata, do you know what that means in this family? Silence. A silence that suffocated her, that made her feel small, insignificant. It means you're useless. The blow was brutal. Renata felt as if she couldn't breathe, as if someone had punched her in the stomach. A murmur spread among the relatives. Some looked down, others smiled cruelly. Mercedes whispered to Estella, Renata's mother, her eyes filled with tears. "No, Mom," Renata interrupted her, her voice broken but firm. "Let her speak." Mercedes smiled, savoring her victory. "Don't get me wrong, dear. It's not your fault. Sometimes you're just not born to be a mother. Some women are only meant to accompany, to serve, to stay in the shadows while others fulfill their duty." Renata felt a burning sensation in her eyes, but she refused to shed a single tear. She looked at Emiliano, silently waiting and begging for his support, but her husband just looked down, clenching his jaw. He said nothing. He didn't defend her. It was then that Renata understood. She was alone. She had always been alone. Mercedes continued mercilessly. "Perhaps if you really wanted to be a mother, you would have done something about it. Maybe the problem isn't medical, but one of will. Maybe if you really loved my son, you would have given him a child." The shame was unbearable. Renata felt everyone's eyes on her. "Judging you? Standing there with your legs trembling?" Mercedes smiled with satisfaction. "Yes, you'd better leave. There's no point in you staying here pretending to be part of this family." Renata looked at her, feeling for the first time a hatred burning in her chest, but she said nothing. It wasn't worth it. She took one last look at Emiliano, desperately hoping that he would do something, that he would take her hand, that he would get up with her, that he would show her that there was still some love left in his heart. But Emiliano just raised his glass to his lips and drank without saying a word. Renata felt her world collapse and knew at that moment that something inside her had died forever. Renata left the dining room with hurried steps, feeling the stairs on her back like sharp daggers. Her heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was going to break her chest. Her hands trembled, her breathing was erratic, and a whirlwind of emotions consumed her inside. When she crossed the threshold and entered the wide hallway of the house, she leaned her hands against the wall, trying to catch her breath, but she couldn't. The humiliation was suffocating her. 8 years. 8 years of enduring contempt, hurtful insinuations, and Emiliano's indifference. 8 years of pretending that none of it hurt her, but this time, it had been different. This time, he hadn't just allowed the humiliation, he had approved of it with his silence. "Renata!" Emiliano's voice echoed in the hallway, and she closed her eyes tightly before turning slowly. He was there, frowning, his gaze full of annoyance, as if she were to blame for everything. "Where are you going?" he asked, crossing his arms. Renata let out a bitter laugh. "Are you really asking me that?" He clicked his tongue, irritated. "You always exaggerate everything. Mercedes is my mother. You know how she is," he burst out, her voice breaking. "Yes, Emiliano, I know how she is, but what I don't understand is how you are. How can you let her humiliate me like this? How can you stay silent? It's no big deal." The disbelief hit her like a punch. "It's no big deal," she repeated, her voice choked with rage and pain. "She called me useless in front of your whole family, and you think it's no big deal?" Emiliano sighed impatiently and rubbed his face as if he were tired of the conversation. "Look, Renata, this situation is difficult for everyone, not just for you." Renata looked at him, feeling something inside her break even more difficult for everyone, she whispered with a lump in her throat. "Who else is suffering here, Emile? You, your mother, your blessed family who feels entitled to have an opinion about my body." He clenched his jaw. "That's not it. Then what is it?" She interrupted him with burning eyes. "Tell me, because I don't understand. Am I the one who's crazy? Am I the one who has to accept being treated like trash just because I can't give you a child?" Emiliano's silence was the confirmation of everything she feared. Yes, he thought that too. He blamed her too. Renata felt like she couldn't breathe. It was as if the person with whom she had shared almost a decade of her life had suddenly become a stranger. Or worse, perhaps she had never really known him. "You know what's worst," she whispered, her voice breaking, "that I was always on your side, despite everything, despite the insults, the doubts, the nights I cried silently because I felt inadequate. I always chose you, Emiliano." He pressed his lips together, but his expression didn't change. "What did you want me to do?" he finally said in a cold tone. "Turn against my mother? Argue with her over something that, well, isn't even a lie?" Renata felt the floor sinking beneath her feet. "Is that what you think?" she whispered, her heart broken. "That I'm useless?" She looked away. She didn't need to answer. Her silence was enough. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not in front of him. Not again. "I understood." Her voice was low, but firm. "I finally understood." Emiliano frowned. What a thing. She stood up straight, squared her shoulders, and looked him straight in the eye. "You've never loved me." He blinked, surprised by her words, but said nothing. He didn't try to deny it, and that said it all. Renata felt a chill run down her spine. 8 years of her life wasted. 8 years believing that one day he would value her, that everything would get better, but it was never going to get better. Reality hit her so hard that it almost hurt physically. Without saying another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Emiliano called her, but she didn't stop. She went down the stairs, crossed the lobby, and walked out the front door without looking back. The night air was bitterly cold, but nothing could compare to the chill in her chest. She didn't know where she would go. She didn't know what she would do, but she did know one thing: she would never return to that hell again. Renata drove aimlessly through the brightly lit streets of the city, her hands trembling on the steering wheel and her vision clouded by tears that refused to fall. Her breathing was erratic and choppy, and her heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't think clearly. She just wanted to get away from him, away from them. The echo of Mercedes's words kept hammering in her mind. "Cruel and ruthless. You're useless. If you really wanted a child, you would have had one already. You're not part of this family." But the worst thing wasn't that. The worst thing was Emiliano, his silence, his indifference, his cruel confirmation that deep down, he thought the same as his mother. A sob escaped her lips as she turned sharply into a side street, parking the car next to a deserted sidewalk. She leaned on the steering wheel, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to break down. The years of humiliation, contempt, sleepless nights, crying in silence, everything exploded inside her like a bomb of pent-up emotions. "Why?" she whispered between gasps, her voice broken. "Why wasn't I enough?" She closed her eyes tightly, remembering remembering how it all began when she met Emiliano. He seemed like the perfect man, passionate, charming, with a smile that broke down any barrier. She had fallen madly in love with him, believing that together they would build a beautiful story. But the story was never beautiful. Not after the wedding. Mercedes never accepted her from the first day. She made it clear that her son deserved better than her, that she wasn't enough. Emiliano defended her at first, but over time, he stopped doing so. Over time, he began to change, until one day, he simply became what he was now, a stranger who saw her as a nuisance. "I'm an idiot," she whispered, clenching her fists. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her blouse and looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were swollen and red, her expression empty. She couldn't go on like this. No more. She picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed a number she hadn't used in a long time. A couple of rings later, a warm, familiar voice answered on the other end. "Renata, are you okay?" It was the voice of Estella, her mother. That was enough to break her down even more. A silent sob escaped her lips. "Mom!" There was a pause. Then her mother's voice sounded firmer, laden with concern. "Where are you, my love?" Renata closed her eyes, feeling the pain in her chest. "I don't know. I just can't take it anymore, Mom." Another pause, then Estella's firm voice. "Listen to me carefully, daughter. Come home, right now." Renata felt a chill run down her spine. Home. It had been so long since she had thought of that place as her home. Her home had been the Montero house, the hell where she had slowly faded away. But now it was time to leave. She took a deep breath, gripped the steering wheel more firmly, and started the car. "I'm coming," she whispered, and for the first time in a long time, she felt she had made the right decision. When she arrived at her mother's house, the door opened before she could even ring the bell. Estella looked at her with eyes full of concern, but before Renata could say a single word, her mother pulled her into a warm, firm embrace. An embrace that needed no words. An embrace that said, "I see you. I understand you. I'm here." Renata felt her resistance crumble. She didn't have to be strong there. She didn't have to pretend she was okay. And for the first time in 8 years, she allowed herself to cry in her mother's arms. The next morning, after a sleepless night with swollen eyes and a head full of thoughts, she made the decision she had been putting off for too long. She went downstairs with determination and found her mother in the kitchen making coffee. Estella looked at her with kindness, but also with the firmness of a woman who had seen her daughter suffer in silence for too long. Renata took a deep breath. "I'm getting a divorce." Estella set the cup on the table without surprise on her face. She just nodded calmly. It was about time. Renata felt a twinge in her chest. Her mother always knew. She always saw what Renata refused to accept, but she didn't judge her or said, "I told you so." She just took her hand gently and squeezed her fingers. "You're not alone, daughter." Renata exhaled slowly, feeling that for the first time in a long time she could breathe. But what she didn't know was that the nightmare wasn't over yet, because Emiliano and Mercedes weren't going to let her go so easily. At Estella's house, it was peaceful, but inside Renata, the storm continued to rage despite her firm decision to divorce him. A feeling of unease gnawed at her inside. What if Emiliano didn't accept it? What if Mercedes did everything she could to prevent it? She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew her hell wasn't over yet, but there was no turning back. She took a deep breath, straightened up, and picked up her cell phone. Her fingers trembled as she searched for Emiliano's number in her contact list. Without thinking twice, she dialed 1, 2, 3 rings. Then Emiliano's voice answered, but not with the worried or desperate tone she had expected. Now his voice sounded cold and annoyed, as if Renata were a nuisance, a problem he didn't feel like solving. Renata clenched her jaw. Something inside her hardened. "I'm going to start the divorce proceedings." Silence. On the other end of the line, it was abrupt. "Divorce?" Emiliano let out a sarcastic laugh. "Why? Because of last night?" "Don't be dramatic, Renata." Renata closed her eyes tightly. Dramatic. That word again. That way of minimizing her pain, of invalidating everything that had happened. She opened her eyes, feeling a burning rage in her chest. "It's not just about last night, Emiliano. It's about everything. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. He no longer sounded irritated. He sounded condescending. Renata, listen to me. You were upset yesterday. I understand. My mother shouldn't have said those things. She shouldn't have said those things. She interrupted him, feeling anger rising in her throat. Is that all you have to say? I'm not going to argue, Renata. Just come home. Renata felt a twinge in her chest. No, don't make this harder than it already is, Emiliano insisted, in a tone as if he were the victim in all this. You know my mother won't change. Neither will I. Do you really want to throw 8 years down the drain over something silly? There was the confirmation. Emiliano never valued her. He was never going to change. Renata felt her heart harden. All those years I waited for you to love me, to respect me, to at least defend me from your mother. And last night I understood that was never going to happen. Her voice no longer trembled. It was firm and confident, but Emiliano laughed with contempt. What are you going to do, Renata? Where are you going to go? You have nothing without me. The words hit her, but not as Emiliano expected, because this time they didn't hurt. This time they opened Renata's eyes completely. Completely. That's where you're wrong, she said in an icy tone. You never had me. And without waiting for his response, she hung up. She stood there with the phone in her hand, feeling her body vibrate with adrenaline. She had done it. She had broken up with him. But before she could process her emotions, her mother entered the room with a tense expression. Renata, she said, frowning. What's wrong? Estella swallowed and lowered her gaze. Her gaze. Mercedes is here. Renata's heart stopped. When Renata went out into the hall, she found Mercedes standing with her arms crossed and a haughty expression on her face. She was dressed like a queen, as if she hadn't spent the previous night destroying her daughter-in-law in front of the whole family. When she saw her, Mercedes's gaze was filled with contempt. So here you are, she said in a tone laden with venom. I knew you'd run to your mommy. Estella took a step forward, but Renata touched her arm, indicating that she would take care of it. She took a deep breath and faced her mother-in-law, with her head held high. Tell me what you want, Mercedes. The woman narrowed her eyes. Don't do this, Renata. Don't destroy what we've built. Renata felt nauseous. What we've built? There's nothing to destroy, she replied coldly. Emiliano and I are done. Mercedes let out a dry laugh, dryly. Don't be ridiculous. You're not going to leave my son. Yes, I am. Mercedes' face hardened. If you divorce Emiliano, you'll be left with nothing. Renata clenched her fists. I don't need anything from you. Mercedes looked at her with a sneer. You're an idiot, Renata. A woman like you without a husband is nothing. No one will love you. No one will respect you. Who would want a defective woman like you? The blow was brutal. But this time Renata didn't fall. She wasn't going to give Mercedes the satisfaction of seeing her break. I'd rather be alone than continue being your slave. Mercedes looked at her with hatred. You'll regret this. No more than I regret joining this family. Mercedes pursed her lips in defeat, and, without another word, turned and left the house with the fury of a woman who couldn't bear to lose. Renata watched her walk away from the window. She had no doubt that Mercedes would not sit idly by, but Renata was not going to take a single step back before continuing. We want to know more about you. Where are you watching us from? Leave us a comment with the name of your city or country. We would love to know and learn more. Where do these stories come from? The following hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Although Mercedes' presence had left her on high alert, Renata did not. For the first time in 8 years, she felt in control of her own life, but the real problem had yet to come. She knew that Emiliano would not stand idly by. She knew that Mercedes, with all her venom, would do everything possible to manipulate the situation in her favor, and she was right. At 3:00 p.m., the sound of a horn outside the house made her tense up. Estella looked out the window and her face hardened. It's Emiliano. Renata felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't ready to see him, but she had to face him. She took a deep breath and walked to the door. When she opened it, Emiliano was there, leaning against his car with his arms crossed. He seemed calm and relaxed, but his eyes were full of contained fury. Are you going to let me in? He asked in a dry tone. No. Emiliano's jaw tensed. Renata, Don't make this more difficult for whom? She asked. Crossing his arms, he laughed sarcastically. For you, Renata. She clenched her fists. I've made my decision. There's nothing more to talk about. Emiliano looked at her with a dark expression. You're not the one who decides. She felt a pang of anger. Excuse me. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. We've been married for 8 years. You're not going to throw it all away just because my mother said a couple of hurtful things. You're not going to ruin our life on a whim. Renata felt her stomach churn. A whim, she repeated in a whisper. Emiliano looked at her impatiently. You're too emotional, always exaggerating everything. Why can't you just let it go? That was the last straw. Renata felt something inside her break completely. Let it go. Her voice was low and dangerous. Let it go. He clicked his tongue. It wasn't that big of a deal, Renata. They were just words. She looked him straight in the eye, feeling icy fury running through her veins. 8 years of contempt. 8 years of humiliation. 8 years of silently enduring while you allowed your mother to treat me like trash. Emiliano frowned. It's not my fault you can't. He stopped, but it was too late. Renata felt her chest burning. Say it. Her voice trembled. Say it, Emiliano. He looked away, uncomfortable, but Renata already understood. You always thought the problem was mine, right? You always thought I was the defective one, Renata replied. Emiliano sighed with annoyance. What did it matter now? Renata's world was reeling. There was the truth. For years, he never doubted himself. He never got tested. He never considered for a second that the problem might not be hers. For him, if there were no children, it was her fault. Renata felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. I was always to blame, wasn't I, Emiliano? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Renata clenched her jaw. You know what the worst part is? That despite everything, I loved you. Emiliano looked at her, but his expression didn't change. I'm sorry, Renata, but I can't change who I am. She felt her eyes burn. Neither can I. She took a step back and closed the door in his face. She didn't hear if Emiliano said anything else. She didn't care. She leaned against the door and closed her eyes. There was no turning back. But she also couldn't have imagined the revenge that Emiliano and Mercedes were about to plot against her. 2 days later, Renata began to experience what it meant to face the wrath of the Monteros. At first, it was subtle, small details that could go unnoticed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. Emiliano stopped responding to her messages about the divorce proceedings, and when she called her lawyer, he informed her that her still husband was not cooperating with the paperwork. He says he wants to talk to you first, the lawyer explained. If there is no mutual agreement, this could become more complicated than necessary. Renata closed her eyes in frustration. Of course, Emiliano was making this difficult. He didn't want to lose control, but that was only the beginning. The next day, her phone began to fill up with unknown numbers. What a shame. 8 years of marriage, and you couldn't give him a child. Women like you don't deserve a marriage. Emiliano deserves better. Renata's heart sank as she read them. It was no coincidence. Mercedes. Only she was capable of something like this. She turned on her laptop and opened her social media accounts. Her stomach churned. Mercedes had started a smear campaign against her, with indirect posts and insinuations that women who cannot bear children should step aside and make room for those who can. There is no worse mistake than a bad choice of wife. The worst part was that the comments from the Monteros' friends and family were on her side, all attacking them and blaming him. A chill ran down her spine. They weren't going to leave her alone. But the hardest blow came that same night. She was in the kitchen with her mother when the doorbell rang. Estella looked out the window and her face hardened. It's Camila. Renata's body stiffened. Before she could react, Estella opened the door, and there she was. Camila, Emiliano's second cousin. Beautiful, perfect, smiling, with one hand resting on her belly. Renata felt the blood drain from her face. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice tense. Camila smiled with false sweetness. I came to give you some news. Renata looked at her silently. No, it couldn't be. Camila caressed her belly and dropped the bomb. I'm pregnant with Emiliano's child. A deafening buzz filled Renata's ears. Estella inhaled sharply, looking at her daughter with concern, but Renata couldn't react. Camila smiled smugly. Mercedes is delighted. Finally, Emiliano will have a child, something you could never give him. Renata felt a wave of dizziness. It couldn't be true, not after everything she had suffered, and yet there was Camila, savoring her defeat. I just wanted you to know, she said with feigned compassion. I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us. Renata felt something break inside her, and for the first time in her life, she felt real hatred. Renata felt the air become thick, as if the room had shrunk, but she clenched her fists tightly, refusing to shed a tear in front of her. She wasn't going to give her that pleasure. Camila watched her with a smile, one hand resting on her belly as if she were enjoying every second of the humiliation. Estella, standing next to Renata, looked at the woman with cutting coldness. You've already delivered your message, so now get out of my house, she said in a firm tone. Camila let out a mocking chuckle. No need to get hostile, Estella. I only came in peace. Peace, Renata spoke for the first time, her voice low but full of venom. You came to rub it in my face that you were sleeping with my husband while I was still married to him. Camila, I don't know what you're talking about. Renata took a step forward without lowering her gaze. If you think this has secured you a place in the Montero family, you're very much mistaken. Mercedes adores me. Mercedes needs you, Renata corrected her. Don't get confused. Camila pursed her lips. At least I'll be the mother of Emiliano's child. You'll never be. The words were a low blow, a dagger straight to the chest, but Renata didn't back down. On the contrary, she smiled a slow, dangerous smile. You're right, she admitted calmly. I will never be the mother of Emiliano's child. Camila seemed satisfied with the answer, but Renata wasn't finished. She leaned slightly toward her and whispered, and neither will you. Camila blinked, confused. What did you say? Renata held her gaze. We'll see. For the first time, Camila's face lost its confidence, and Renata saw it. She saw the fear in her eyes. Eyes because Camila was hiding something, and Renata was going to find out that night. As the icy wind beat against her bedroom window, Renata couldn't sleep. The pain of betrayal was still there, but there was something else, something that wouldn't leave her alone. Camila was too confident, too sure that this child would make her untouchable. Why? She clenched her jaw and picked up her phone. She opened the conversation with Emiliano. Her hands were shaking, but she took a deep breath and wrote, I want to see you tomorrow. Alone, just you and me. It took him a few minutes to respond, but when he did, his answer was immediate. Okay, at 10 a.m. at the usual cafe. Renata left her cell phone on the nightstand and closed her eyes. She was going to get answers, and if her suspicions were correct, Camila was about to lose her game. The cafe was almost empty at that hour of the morning. The aroma of freshly baked bread floated in the air, but Renata felt neither hunger nor tiredness, only anger. When she entered, Emiliano was already there, sitting at a table in the back with his cell phone in his hand and an almost untouched cup of coffee on the table. He was wearing a perfectly ironed white shirt, and his hair was well combed, as if nothing in his life had changed. Renata walked forward with firm steps and sat down in front of him without saying a word. Emiliano looked up and looked at her with a mixture of boredom and annoyance. I don't have all day, Renata. What did you want to talk about? She leaned on the table, interlacing her hands and maintaining her composure. Camila came to see me yesterday. Emiliano blinked slowly, showing no obvious reaction, and Renata let out a bitter laugh. She told me she's pregnant. The silence between them became dense, heavy, suffocating. Emiliano didn't react immediately. He just picked up his cup and took a sip of coffee as if it meant nothing. And what do you expect me to say? Renata felt a chill run down her spine. That easy? That simple? You're not even going to deny it? Emiliano sighed with annoyance and slammed his cup down on the table. Renata, what do you want from me? For me to get down on my knees and beg for forgiveness? You were the one who left. She clenched her fists under the table. I left because you made my life impossible. Because you left me alone in that hell with your mother. Because you never defended me. Emiliano leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You left because you couldn't give me a child. Renata felt the air leave her. The words were a direct blow to her deepest wound, but she wasn't going to let it destroy her again. She took a deep breath and forced herself to smile. How convenient. Now it turns out that the infidelity, the betrayal, and the humiliation are my fault. Emiliano leaned back in his chair with an annoyed expression. That's not how it was. Things just happened. Renata felt her blood boil. Camila was there when you weren't. Renata laughed, but it was a dry laugh with no trace of amusement. I was always there. Emiliano, I was the one who was by your side on the nights you came home drunk, when you were frustrated with work, when your mother treated you like a little boy, and you didn't have the courage to stand up to her. Her voice trembled, but she refused to break. I was there when we thought something was wrong with me, when I took tests, when I cried at every appointment, when I filled myself with medication, hoping it would fix what you thought was broken in me. Her eyes fixed on Emiliano's, and this time it was he who looked away, but she wasn't finished. Camila, you weren't there for him, Emiliano. Camila was waiting for the moment to take my place, and you, like the idiot you are, let her. Emiliano's face changed for the first time. He was affected. He cleared his throat and ran his hand through his hair. Renata, there's no point in talking about this anymore. Things happened the way they did. Camila is pregnant, and I'm going to take responsibility. Renata felt a knot of anger in her throat. Take responsibility? Emiliano looked at her impatiently. Yes, I'm going to do the right thing. She watched him, feeling an icy fury run through her body. Do the right thing. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. How could you do this to me? Emiliano frowned. It's not the same. You're right. She nodded. She felt a wave of irony in her chest. It's not the same because you didn't make Camila go through 8 years of humiliation before deciding to do the right thing. The silence between them was absolute. And then Renata saw it. She saw it in the way Emiliano looked away, in the way he avoided her gaze. There was something else. There was something he didn't want to tell her. Renata narrowed her eyes and spoke in a cold tone. Tell me the truth, Emiliano. He frowned. What truth? She rested her hands on the table. Tell me that you yourself saw the pregnancy test, that you are certain that this child is yours. Emiliano opened his mouth to respond, but remained silent. Renata's stomach churned. She whispered, feeling a wave of dizziness. Don't tell me you didn't even check. Emiliano frowned and ran his hand through his hair, uncomfortable. Why doubt it? Camila wouldn't lie to me like that. Renata felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. There it was. There was the crack in Camila's perfect story. My God, she murmured, putting her hand to her head. You're more of an idiot than I thought. Emiliano slammed his open palm on the table in irritation. Don't insult me again. But Renata was no longer afraid of him. She looked at him with contempt and got up from her chair. When you discover the truth, Emiliano, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that it was me who opened your eyes. He looked at her with fury. I have nothing to discover. Renata smiled coldly. We'll see about that. Without saying another word, she turned and left the cafe. She knew Emiliano was an idiot, but she didn't think he was so naive. Camila was lying, and Renata was going to prove it. Emiliano's world collapsed in an instant. The medical report was in his hands, with his name in capital letters, and a diagnosis impossible to ignore: irreversible infertility. He sat in the doctor's office, feeling cold sweat run down his back. It couldn't be true. He looked at the doctor in disbelief. There must be a mistake, he muttered with a dry throat. The doctor shook his head with a serious expression. I'm sorry, Emiliano. We did the tests twice. Your sperm count is extremely low and immobile. There is no possibility that you could have conceived a child naturally. The words hit him like a punch in the stomach. He couldn't have children. He never could. He fell silent, feeling his world shatter. He muttered, clutching the paper desperately. Camila, she's pregnant. The doctor looked at him with pity. Then Emiliano sighed, letting the truth fall like a sentence. That child is not yours. Emiliano felt the air leave him. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. No, it couldn't be true. But it was. He had been stupid. Renata was right. When Emiliano arrived at Mercedes's house, his mother was in the living room. smiling as she leafed through a catalog of cribs and baby clothes proudly, triumphantly. But when she saw her son's expression, the smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked, closing the catalog with a snap. Emiliano threw the papers on the coffee table. Mercedes frowned and picked them up curiously. Her eyes scanned the words quickly, and then her face paled. "No," she whispered, reading and rereading. "It can't be." She stood up suddenly, the paper trembling in her hands. "Tell me this is a mistake, Emiliano." But he said nothing. Mercedes felt the blood boiling in her veins. "That bitch cheated on us." Mercedes threw the paper on the floor and grabbed her purse furiously. "I'm going to kill her!" Camila's apartment door almost collapsed under Mercedes's furious blows. "Open up, you bitch!" It took Camila a few seconds to appear, looking annoyed, but when she saw Mercedes's distraught face, she knew something was wrong. "What's wrong, Mercedes?" She slapped her so hard that Camila's head spun. "How dare you cheat on me, bitch?" Camila put her hand to her cheek in surprise. "What are you talking about?" Emiliano advanced toward her, his face red with rage and his eyes injected with fury. "It's not mine, liar." Camila blinked nervously, and Emiliano grabbed her arms tightly. "Whose is it?" he shouted, shaking her. Tears began to run down her face. "I don't know. I didn't dare. I don't know whose it is." Mercedes almost fainted. "You're trash," she shouted, pushing her away. "You made us believe that you would carry our blood, that you would be the mother of my grandchild." Camila fell to her knees, crying. She was afraid. She knew that if she told the truth, Emiliano would never accept her. Emiliano felt a disgust that consumed him entirely. He had ruined his marriage because of a lie. He had allowed his mother to destroy Renata because of a lie. Mercedes put her hand to her chest, feeling her whole world collapse. All her pride, all her contempt for Renata, everything had been in vain. Mercedes turned to Emiliano with eyes full of rage. "You're stupid," she said. He looked at her with disbelief. Mercedes advanced toward him with uncontrollable fury. "You let Renata go. A woman who truly loved you. A woman who suffered because of you." Emiliano felt a lump in his throat. Mercedes had never been so out of control. And all for what? She shouted, hitting him in the chest. "For what, you idiot?" Emiliano had no answer, because he had lost everything. While Emiliano and Mercedes's world was falling apart, Renata was flourishing. Her new interior design studio was growing faster than she had imagined. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by respect and admiration. She was no longer the broken woman who feared every word Mercedes said. She was no longer the submissive wife who waited for love from a man who never valued her. She was free, and without knowing it, life had one more surprise in store for her. Because weeks later, when she woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach, she took a pregnancy test just to rule out an absurd possibility. But when the screen showed a positive result, her eyes filled with tears. She could be a mother. The problem had never been her. Emiliano had lost everything he wanted most, and she finally had everything. The golden sun bathed the streets of Madrid, reflecting off the windows of the exclusive hotel where the wedding was being held. Warm lights illuminated every corner of the luxurious hall, decorated with white and gold flowers, creating an elegant and sophisticated atmosphere. Soft music floated in the air, mingling with the laughter and murmurs of the guests who were sharing a night of celebration. Renata was at the center of it all, radiant in a delicate lace dress that fit her figure perfectly. She had never been happier. It was her wedding, and this time with the right man. Matthias looked at her with absolute devotion, holding her firmly as they danced to the rhythm of a calm melody. "You are the most beautiful woman in the world," he whispered, leaning in to brush her forehead with his. Renata smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. This was what it felt like to be truly loved. Matthias was not only her husband now, he was her greatest support in the moments when she thought she would never trust anyone again. When they met, she was still building herself up, focused on her career and regaining her self-esteem after everything she had been through with Emiliano and Mercedes. She wasn't looking for love, but he came along without forcing anything, with patience, respect, and genuine admiration for the woman she had become. Little by little, Renata began to believe again, opened her heart again, and allowed someone to love her as she always deserved. And now, here she was, marrying a man who would never make her feel inadequate. Matthias slid his hands around her waist, pulling her closer to his body. "What are you thinking about?" he asked with a smile. Renata looked into his eyes, those eyes that always looked at her with tenderness, never with judgment, never with contempt. "How lucky I am," she whispered. Matthias laughed softly and caressed her cheek. "I'm the lucky one, my love." Renata rested her head on his chest, closing her eyes, enjoying the peace that enveloped her. She had finally won, miles away, in a house that was once synonymous with power and status. Mercedes Montero cried silently. The Montero residence, once full of parties, family gatherings, and conversations full of arrogance, was now dark, cold, and empty. The scandal with Camila had destroyed the Montero name. They became the laughing stock of society. Camila disappeared after giving birth, abandoning the child with her mother, claiming that she never wanted to be a mother, that she only did it out of self-interest. Mercedes kept the child, but without her beloved legacy, without her honor, without her dignity, and worst of all, without her son. Because Emiliano was no longer even a shadow of the arrogant man he once was. After discovering that he had destroyed his marriage for nothing, that he had humiliated the only woman who truly loved him for a lie, he fell apart. Mercedes had seen him sink into depression, alcohol, and despair. He was left without friends, without a wife, without respect. But what destroyed him most was what he discovered a year later. Renata had become a mother. She was able to have children, and Emiliano found out in the worst possible way, through a photograph. An article about the success of Renata's design studio showed a picture of her in her office holding her baby in her arms, with a bright smile full of happiness and love. The man next to her had his hand on her back and a look of pure adoration. It wasn't Emiliano, it was Matthias. Emiliano looked at the photo over and over again, his chest burning with remorse. He had despised Renata. He had treated her as if she were nothing. He had made her believe that she was the problem, when the problem had always been him. Mercedes watched him from the living room door, her face pale, with wrinkles she hadn't had before, the weight of her own sins marked on her skin. Everything she had done to Renata, all the venom, all the contempt, all the humiliations, had been for nothing. Renata was happy, and they had been left alone in ruin. Mercedes let out a trembling sigh and closed her eyes. She would give anything to go back, to tell Emiliano to treat his wife well, to tell Renata that it was enough, but it was too late. Renata would never come back. Renata would never forgive, and worst of all, Renata would never be humiliated by anyone again. Back in Madrid, Renata walked barefoot on the sand of the hotel's private beach, where they were celebrating their wedding. The sound of the sea and the warm breeze enveloped her in a blanket of peace. She looked up at the moon, placing a hand on her belly. She was going to be a mother again. Her happiness was so absolute that she felt she couldn't breathe. She felt Matthias's arms wrap around her waist, hugging her from behind. "Ready to start our new life," he whispered in her ear. Renata closed her eyes and smiled. More than ready, because this time there was no fear, no doubts. There was no sadness, only love, only happiness, only the future she always deserved. To all the women who have been humiliated, underestimated, and made to feel inadequate, you are valuable. Your worth does not depend on the opinions of others, a surname, or the approval of a man. You do not need anyone's validation to be powerful, strong, and sufficient. If you were ever made to believe that you weren't good enough, if you were hurt, if you were made to doubt yourself, remember this: the problem was never you. Like Renata, you can get up, rebuild yourself, and find the happiness you always deserved. Don't let fear keep you in a place where you are not valued. Love yourself, respect yourself, choose your peace, and never forget that no one has the right to dim your light. You are light, and one day that light will shine brighter than any shadow from your past. If this story touched your heart, We invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories like this one that seek to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the next video and join us for another story that is sure to captivate you from the very beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comment, and share this video with those you think need it. Thank you for being part of this community. See you in the next video.